a very long time since we have seen a fully staged Rameau opera in the UK. Why do you think it's been so long, and what can people expect?
Well, we should start right at the beginning. I think that when we started this whole Baroque revival, the other repertoires were much more evident, if you like. They were easy to approach. So if we went to Purcell, and then the English was very good, and then the Italians is very straightforward. You know, you play what's on the page, and that sounds great. And then the Germans, and then there's a big challenge with the style in French music, because there's so much which is not on the page, and that's true of a lot of Baroque music, but there's particularly true, I think, of French Baroque music, right from Lully right until Rameau. And so you need to have done an immense amount of work on the style and on the rhetoric and on the way of delivering the music in order for it to speak. And so that is already sets us back a few years. And then, of course, it's quite an undertaking, and I think, you know, I tip my hat to Gussington and to Dougie Boyd to have taken on this challenge, because of course you need a specialist orchestra, and you need that orchestra to know about things, and you need someone like me who's done a lot of this music before, and then you need a good chorus, and you need quite a lot of soloists, and you need a ballet. And so that means you need a choreographer along with your director. And so, you know, things start to mount up, and it is a big undertaking to put on one of these big Rameau pieces. It's a huge undertaking. But it is essential. It's that we have to respond to that challenge, because you can't understand lots of other music without understanding what's happening in France. You know, France has this immense effect on German culture. You know, you can't play the suites of Bach without having played Lully. Bach is trying to connect himself to that whole ethos of the French Baroque, and so in order to treat them well, you should know about both, as it were. So yes, it's a big challenge, and I think it's because it's such a big challenge that it's so rarely heard. But that doesn't mean you must come and hear it. It's fantastic.
Could I push you on, let's say, 2 or 3 personal highlights from the score, whether those are sung or the ballet music or purely instrumental?
Ooh, there are very many highlights right from the very beginning, because the prologue is a sort of piece apart, because this is a comic opera. It has a tragic element, but it's a comic opera, and so it's a very first. It's a first, and so the prologue speaks about inventing a new comedy. Is the invention of comedy, and so the prologue sets us up for what we're then going to do. Although there's no real relationship between the prologue and the opera, it says, look out, because what we're going to attempt in the next couple of hours has never been done before. And then, of course, we get into the opera, and there are lots of wonderful moments. There's the entrance of Platée. Platée is, of course, sung by a man, but she is a woman. It's not a man playing a woman. She is a woman, and what Rameau was searching for was a sort of limit to how strange we can make a person. Because it has to be, of course, a woman that Jupiter is not going to fall in love with, and since he falls in love with just about anyone who can walk, then we need someone so strange, so unlikely, that Jupiter is never going to fall in love with her. So we get this arrival of this strange creature, and it's done very beautifully and wittily and charmingly in this production, with Sam Bowden singing, and that's a gorgeous moment. I think we'd have to talk about the music of Folly. That's the most Italianate of the music. That's immensely virtuoso, and really there for no other reason except to be entertainment. You know, the plot does not move on because Folly arrives. She doesn't have any particular effect on the outcome, but the music is absolutely virtuoso and ridiculously fun to play and to sing and to put on stage.
And you know the title role, of course, from the inside out, literally having performed and indeed recorded and filmed it yourself. How do you sort of what insights do you bring from having lived that part on stage yourself when you come to conduct?
Yeah, I was lucky to sing it in I think I sang it in 4 different productions. I think that's very important, because obviously 4 different directors and 4 different musical directors are going to ask for 4 different things. And so it's really important when I arrive here that I don't try and say, do what I did there. You know, we have to take the artists as they are and allow them to express this amazing music through their own voice. But it is really useful to have been up there and to know the physicality of the challenges of the piece, the strangeness of the piece, the strangeness of playing a female character as a touching female character. It isn't comic that a man plays a woman, but it is very strange, and you need to bring that in. There's a sweetness in Platée, a sort of innocence, a naivety, which is quite hard to get, I think. And particularly as a man, you know, if you've sung a lot of this music, you end up singing a lot of princes, and, you know, some kings, and you know you're constantly celebrating your masculinity. And then when you're presented with this challenge of singing Platée, you have to search very deep in yourself and in the way in which you sing, the way in which you produce the voice. And of course, the way in which you move. It's a completely other from everything you've done before. And that has been very useful to be able to share with Sam some of the challenges that I felt, and for him, and to warn him about some of the things which I think are tricky with the piece, but also to celebrate the things which are beautifully accessible in the piece, and really to go for that sweet femininity of Platée, without it being complex, without it being. It needs to keep its very special naivety, which is a big challenge.
If you're working with singers that are relatively new to the French Baroque style, what would you say are the central things to focus on to really nail the idiom that's going on here?
Well, it all starts with the language, I think Rameau, maybe more than any other, suffers in translation because the language is part of the musicality, and the text leads the music. That's true of all Baroque, but it's particularly true here, I think. And you get a sort of rhythm of not only of rhyme, but of sense in the language. So you start with the language. And then the piece is, like a lot of Baroque operas, is shared between recitative and aria. You know, it's not like Handel, where you'll get a short recitative and then 12 minutes of singing an aria with a da capo and so on. It's very much a more balanced piece than that. And that allows it to be much more humorous in some ways, because you can have these proper conversations between people. And they have to sound like real conversations, to the extent that if you get it right, if you get the style right, and you understand the tension of the phrases, you begin to sound like you're acting, and you can sit in the audience and forget that people are singing. And if we can get to that point, and I'm absolutely sure we will, because the cast is fantastic and very dedicated. If you get to that point where you can forget they're singing and you're just involved in the action, in the beauty of the poetry and in the language, but that's quite a big challenge. And then within the singing, of course, it's highly ornamented, and there's a whole vocabulary of ornaments which if we do use, if we're using trills as we might use in Bach or Handel, they're not the same trills as is used in Rameau. And the treaties talk about, if you read Bassi or Berard talks about the huge multitude of trills you can have. Simply to say there's a trill is not enough. The trill depends on the context, on the note, on the context within the phrase, on the word, on the emotional context. And all of those trills have to be treated very differently and very carefully. And then there's this beautiful Rameau line, which always goes from relaxation to tension to relaxation, and you need to be able to build it through, and that's true of the orchestra as well as the singers.
What facets of the orchestration should people listen out for, particularly if they're not familiar with this music?
Well, Rameau is one of the very first who starts properly orchestrating things. If you think about Handel, I'm a huge Handel fan, but Handel most of Handel is played by the strings. You might have an oboe, a flute, rarely, particularly in the later works. In the earlier works, there's more. But Rameau really begins to use the orchestra. You have the flutes replying to the oboes. You know, we have a relatively small orchestra still. It's mainly a string orchestra with harpsichord. And then you have flutes, oboes, and bassoons. But what he does with them is absolutely incredible. It's incredible. It's extremely witty, and you'll never hear it. I hope you don't hear that it's complex, but his writing is extremely complex. And then when you hear it, it sounds immensely natural. But of course, we're talking about a composer who's going to outlive Bach by 10 years. He bridges that movement towards what we now call classical music. So we're in a moment of development towards having different instruments related to different parts of the whole of the aria or of the dance.
And we should talk a little about the origins of this piece, because as well as being quite a game changer for Rameau in terms of his career, I gather there was a promotion fairly shortly after the premiere of this. It was written as for a wedding ceremony, but the story really doesn't seem to lend itself naturally to that. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yes, it's not a piece I'd want in my wedding. But officially, in fact, it's not really. It was performed at the wedding. So it was performed at the wedding of the Infanta of Spain with the Dauphin of France. So a very important wedding where there had to be an immense amount of music. So they were looking to have large pieces every day for at least a week, 10 days. And so, and they had asked another composer to produce a piece, and it became clear that this piece was never going to make it to the stage. It was too slow, and it wasn't ready, and so on. So in fact, very late on, they went back to Rameau and said, "Do you have another piece which we could do?" And he said, "Well, I have this comic opera," and I think they thought, "Oh, comic, that'll be very jolly for a wedding," without really going deeply into what Platée is about, because Platée is, of course, about a wedding, a false wedding, where the groom is a serial, he has serial affairs, and the bride is a little ugly monster from the lagoon. So these are not very flattering images of what the court might have wanted, but he did save the day in that they did it at Versailles. I think the court found it difficult, but the court found it difficult not just because it was for a wedding, but if you look back to Lully, if you had a god on stage, that god would be reflected by the king. The king would be sitting over here, and he would see Jupiter, and Jupiter would sing gloriously and be the paragon of virtue, and everyone would understand that that is a depiction of the king. Whereas here, the court around Jupiter, they are the worst people. They are the Machiavelli. They're producing this appalling humiliation for Platée. And also, they are deeply unattractive, all of them. And Jupiter, the most so, I think. And so the court would look at it with a strange eye. Of course, it wasn't created for a court performance. It was created for the public. But nonetheless, I think the court would say, well, even if you're giving this to the public, what are you projecting about power and about godliness to our public when we still have Louis XV on the throne? This is a strange business. So the court didn't love it in 1745, and then in 1749 it was given to the public, and they absolutely adored it. And that, we're a long way yet from the events of the end of the century. But there is this, you feel this happening in Rameau, and it happens again in Boreade, for example, is clearly a relatively anti-monarchical piece, or at least could be interpreted as such. You feel this flottement, we would say, this the rumours are beginning to sound within the artistic world about where the power really finds itself in France.
Thank you. I must ask you one question about the extraordinary setting that we have out here in Garsington, this sort of semi-alfresco feeling. What sort of opportunities does that present musically, and also how can you see that working with this particular piece, which does make a lot of mention of the natural world and the creatures that inhabit it?
It does, yes, and you know, you can hear the creatures within the orchestration. You hear sort of frogs and you hear birds, and they're all referred to. And you hear a donkey. And so nature is absolutely with us, and I must say I love it. And also, it's a piece which goes from a very bright and optimistic beginning towards a somewhat darker end. And so the way in which the light will work, that we start off in the daylight on that amazing stage in the Garsington Opera, and we will be lit by the sun, and that works. That works wonderfully. You know, Jupiter is Apollo, and Apollo is the god of the sun, and so we start there, and then as we go through, and things get more tense and more frustrating, particularly for Platée, then we move into the darkness, and we finish in the darkness, and the end of Platée has a certain darkness to it. So I think it's a real advantage to work like that. I think we forget that a lot of Baroque music was given in gardens, and the gardens were often formed for music, and that's certainly the case in the music in the gardens in Versailles. And so we're going back to something which is absolutely fundamental to the creation of the piece in the first place. And so I love it. I think it's and it's so beautiful. You know, of course, come for the music, come for Platée, come for Rameau, but also come for the gardens and this incredible setting. And it's my first time here, and as I drove down to my first rehearsal in the opera, it's an experience like no other, and it's a rare experience. You know, people are not constantly invited into the heart of the Wormsley Estate, and it's just an amazing experience. Bring a good picnic, a couple of glasses of wine, and it's an unforgettable experience in Wormsley.